Energy Transition, episode number 54. Our topic today is the EU moves toward forming a natural gas buyers cartel. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, David Blackman, Irina Slav, and Temi Nimet. And David, it's afternoon in the US today, no?
Well, no, it's just 9 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. because we stupidly did our ritual of going to daylight savings time over the weekend. I hate it so much. Anyway, here we are.
That's great. Yeah, sure. Um, so today's topic is based on an article published by Irina Slav in the Oil Price magazine. And Irina, the question is for you first. Is there a real chance for a cartel of buyers to be created?
Well, in the sense that OPEC is a cartel of producers, no. Because there are many more buyers of liquefied natural gas in the world than the EU. So the EU can't really set the price. The idea of the joint buying is to get a bargain, basically, to get lower prices because they're buying in bulk. But the thing is that, according to what the EU officials are saying, they won't be buying every single molecule of gas they need. Initially, the pooling of buyers will be for a mandatory 15% of energy storage capacity. To me, it's completely pointless because you can't do anything with 15% of storage. To prepare for winter, you need to fill your storage capacity, not have 15% of it, because it will go quickly if it's cold, when it's cold. But apparently this is the initial idea, and they are now talking to buyers. Apparently there are many gas producers who are interested and who wouldn't be if you're buying big quantities. But still, it will be the buyers setting the price, because there are also big buyers in Asia. And those countries in Asia, China and Japan and South Korea, they're so dependent on LNG exports that they will be ready to pay anything that's being asked by buyers to secure these supplies.
Who is bigger, Temi, Europe or Asia in terms of natural gas imports? I don't know if it's an easy question, but
I'm not sure. I think that it must be pretty close. David might have that data. I'm not sure, but I think what Irina points out is this idea that they can be setting this price. And it makes me wonder about the long-term contracts that have already been signed by countries like Germany and how this plays in. And so my sense is that this is kind of like the emergency filling, because it's a lot of it, if you read the legislation, is based on.
Oh, no.
Oh, we lost her. We lost Tammy.
yeah, we lost Temi. But she is still there.
Wrong things.
Well, there she is.
Hi.
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know what happened.
Who knows?
Was I saying the wrong things?
no.
So anyway, what I thought was interesting about this legislation is that it's not just about pooling this. They say it's voluntary, that countries can decide to join or not or whatever, but it also has the access rights to supply. And that will be decided by a committee. So when it comes time to withdraw your natural gas, it will be decided in some respects, at least according to the legislation, by a committee that decides who's got more need. So let's say Germany has a lot of need and poor Lithuania or something doesn't have the same kind of need. That's going to be distributed in that way. And the other aspect is that they've created regional working groups to advise on how this works. Well, France and Germany get representation on two separate regional groups. So this is really a France-Germany thing, it seems, rather than the EU in fairness and equity and solidarity is, 50 times repeated in this legislation. So it seems to be more of a France-Germany thing than to protect them and their consumers. As usual. Yeah.
Sounds
But
like
the-
something Nikita Khrushchev would love. Yes, it's
I know.
Or
But
any
is it-
other central economic planner for that matter. It's
Right,
really a
exactly.
dream come true.
yeah.
but it's not possible to have a long-term contract, David, with the US providing LNG for Europe. Is it possible?
Well, yeah, but so not at a fixed price. Okay. I mean, the suppliers of LNG are not going to surrender the upside of access to the spot market prices for LNG, particularly when their product is in overwhelming demand. And, the answer to the question earlier is that Asia certainly has far more volumetric need in the long run for LNG than Europe will. Europe has a short term need over the next couple of years that is really pressing. And they have shown the ability, European countries have shown a real knack for driving the price of LNG up for everyone. But they don't, as Irina and Tammy both pointed out, they don't really command the market share to be able to drive the price of LNG down for everyone, particularly when you have all these other big consumers of LNG, like Pakistan and China and Indonesia and on and on and on over in Asia, who are desperate to have it and willing to pay high prices for it, but have seen themselves really outbid by Europe over this past winter. And so the conundrum for Europe seems to me in all of this still remains: are you going to be willing to enter into, say, a 10 or 15-year supply agreement, as many of these Asian nations have been willing to do, to import LNG from the US and Qatar and Australia over a long term in order to command a better price for the product? And it's hard for me, honestly, to see these countries, particularly Germany, which remains obsessed with its energy wind thing, trying to pretend that's going to be successful. It's really hard to see them agreeing to enter into a long-term agreement at a discounted price for massive quantities of LNG, past the next 2 years. And I mean, this is a country that is going to outlaw the internal combustion engine in 2035. That's just 12 years from now. And so I mean, I don't blame them for trying to do this, and maybe they'll be able to command some decent deals for LNG over the next couple of years to help them get through the next 2 winters. But I have to agree with Irina and Tammy that it's hard to see this being successful, on anything like the scale that OPEC Plus has been successful in influencing oil prices over the past few years.
All problems that we are facing are related to the Nord Stream problem that we had in the past, or the problems are different? Because prices from the invasion of Russia in Ukraine start growing, but nowadays are going down.
Well, yes, because the winter was mild, or as Euractiv reported.
Oh, that's the
recently,
U.S. price. Okay,
thanks.
sorry.
Oh
Thanks,
yeah,
Tammy.
US price.
It was the warmest winter on record for the European Union. Now it's a problem. It was a blessing. Now it's a problem. But
Right.
I like to remind everyone when we talk about European gas prices that the price rise began in 2021. It began several months before the Russian invasion. It began because there wasn't enough gas, relative to demand. And that winter wasn't mild. It was a normal winter.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the uncertainty of supply, as they called it, after Russia invaded the Ukraine, pushed prices higher. And then Gazprom started reducing the flow. And I think the EU was too busy saying, we told you so, to think about what this entails. I mean, of course, we're slapping sanction after sanction, and you shouldn't respond in any way. It was totally shocking and unexpected, of course. Then Nord Stream came, and that took off 55 billion cubic meters annually from European supply. So that was a huge gap. And winter was drawing closer, so obviously prices spiked during the summer after the Nord Stream sabotage. And that pushed the bill for the European Union, the gas bill of the EU, much, much higher, because they were basically scrambling for every single available cargo of LNG on the spot market. And yet they still, as David said, they still want to rely on the spot market instead of committing to long-term deals. David, you talked about the next 2 winters, and then what happens during the third winter?
Right.
We're never going to have enough solar and wind to replace cheap gas.
Yes, but you can't admit that now, right? Isn't that the point? You can't admit that now. You have to wait a couple of years before you admit that and start thinking.
Yeah. And be shocked and totally surprised that this is happening, even though it was very easy to foresee, just as happened with Russian gas. I mean, they tend to be shocked by things that could have been easily foreseen and prepared for, anticipated and prepared for. But the European politicians are not doing this, or they will be relying on the spot market, although I expect in possibly a couple of years, they might have a change of heart and say, you know what, a long-term contract might be a good idea. And that would be great timing, because right now long-term contracts are, LNG supply under long-term contracts, it's completely booked, so to speak, until 2026. But by 2026, there will be a lot more US LNG production capacity coming online. So that will be a good time to change their minds, right. Politicians to change their minds about long-term commitments.
I think the only time they want long-term commitments, though, is when the price is low, which is maybe why they're pushing for this cartel, right? Because then it'd be like, oh, the prices are really low. I think maybe we should lock in some long-term contracts and so on. But no one wants the long-term, at least from a consuming perspective, when the prices are high.
Yeah, that's right. Tammy, and North Sea has enough natural gas to support UK consumption or not?
I think it could, but I mean, there's all these restrictions on production there, and they need to be investing more in enhancing the existing production and create new fields and so on. But there's so much resistance by the environmental movement to prevent that. Like, I mean, Shell was supposed to start a new drilling, and they got permission to do so. And Greenpeace is suing them, suing the government for approving it. So I don't know if it's even gone to court yet or what, but time's kind of running out for the drilling seasons and so on in the North Sea, and to put all that stuff in place. So they complain about companies not investing in exploration and production, and then you see what Saudi Aramco's numbers were released on the weekend, I guess, and they're going to do a massive capital expenditure this year. So is the EU going to find itself putting its eggs in the Middle East basket again, the way they had before when, in the 70s? I know there's this push for the United States, but I mean, what happened to the idea of free markets and competition when now they want to establish this buyer's cartel, which seems to fly in the face of that sort of ideology and what's supposed to be motivating countries here. And I would like to just add that, honestly, I believe this is precedent setting in the sense of they're going to work out the bugs for energy, because everyone's like, oh, it's an energy crisis, we need to keep prices low. And then they'll create a food cartel, because as Irina was commenting on her Substack today, they keep warning that there's going to be food shortages, and there's a war on fertilizer. There's a war on European farmers. There were protests in Holland on the weekend, in The Hague and stuff. They're going to be closing down minimum 3,000 farms this year in Holland with a planned 17,000. I mean, that's outrageous. And then you have the greenhouses, they can't afford to grow stuff because the energy is too high. And then you have the war on fertilizer. So and then the EU wants to take away normal farmland and put it to organic. Well, what's that going to do to food production? So then there's going to be a food crisis, and they'll be like, oh, well, we have to find a way to have bulk purchases of food so that we can keep the prices low for our consumers and so on. So I'm a little concerned from a precedent perspective on what this could mean for food then. And then it would just really encapsulate the European Union going down this rather command and control situation where they want to command and control all of the European states to behave in a certain way.
And that is when this is when the idea of wartime style rationing would make so much sense.
Right.
Yeah. David, so it's much easier to import than produce in home.
Well, I mean, I guess it is until the imports run short. I mean, this is all such a cynical strategy, and everything that's happening is the result of the strategy invoked by the environmentalist movement and the politicians who, do their bidding from a policy standpoint. The strategy is to create shortages, run up prices, and then point fingers of blame at the forms of energy you don't like as being the culprit. So in Netherlands, they're going to create shortages of food that are going to cascade throughout the global society. And they're going to blame a fertilizer shortage ultimately, and the producers of fertilizers who, if you take it all the way back to the feedstock, is natural gas, right? And so it's all going to become the fault of big oil for not producing enough natural gas to make the fertilizer, to feed the farms that the government has put out of business and grow the crops that can't be grown in an organic way in anything resembling the quantities needed to feed the global population. And it's all part of a strategy here to drive up costs of everything and create boogeymen in the energy space as being the culprits for all of it, when in reality, everything we're experiencing here is being created by government policy. Bad government policy has led to all of this, and it's bad policy based on climate alarmism. Everything goes back to that, every bit of it. And, when you can control the news media and control the narrative, you're able to execute a cynical strategy like this. And, you have an administration in Washington that, and in Europe that are willing to create these policies that are going to lead to this. It's all very frustrating because to those of us here on this podcast, none of this is surprising, right? And the people who view this podcast understand it, but we're like 3 to 5% of the population, maybe, if it's that big. And no one else, knows anything about any of this. And so they just get their news from traditional media sources and think it's all big oil's fault. And, that's where we're heading. And
climate change, don't forget climate change.
And climate change.
Oh, yeah, it's the fault of climate change, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
That's exactly what Luca is trying to say.
There's our friend Luca.
Yeah.
Damn global warming. They don't like it, yet it's saving our bacon here in Europe. Damn if you do, damn if you don't. Well, yeah, I guess that's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to clarify because I'd sent Irina that article where they're now. It's a really hot winter, whatever, the hottest on record, where their record span 1991 to 2020.
Yes, 30 years.
So it's not even like over a couple hundred years or something. It's like
not even 100
years.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And the last record was 2 years ago. Conveniently, yeah.
Conveniently, yeah.
But David, some countries are trying to develop natural gas and oil and other energies in Asia, Africa. What can they secure LNG cargoes in terms of EU markets?
Well, I mean, the problem there is that, I say problem. I mean, that's the free market in action. The willing buyer who's willing to pay the highest price is going to get the cargoes and commands the biggest market share. And so, when you look at a country like Pakistan that had been converting its economy away from coal to natural gas to meet climate emissions goals, has found itself completely unable to secure LNG cargoes for over a year now, has been suffering through massive blackouts, and announced 2 weeks ago that it's going back to coal because Pakistan can secure coal supplies adequate to feed its economy and its people. It can't secure natural gas because Europe has driven up the price and gobbled up all the cargoes. And I mean, I don't know what else they can do. Honestly, they're not going to be able to grow an economy and feed their people with windmills and solar panels. So they have to do something. Coal is the quickest and cheapest and easiest fuel to resort to in a situation like that. And the same thing in Japan. Japan is going back to both nuclear again and coal because that's the reliable generating source Japan is able to secure and build in its economy. And you're going to see many other countries make similar decisions. We are seeing, because despite what the climate alarm community wants these developing nations to do, which is remain poor and hungry into perpetuity for the sake of climate change and reducing emissions, these governments want their people to be fed and warm and have clothes and be able to keep the lights on and grow their economy. And they're going to go for the fuel source that's available and affordable to them. And so, unfortunately for natural gas, as a global commodity, it's being monopolized in a couple of big markets right now. And you have all these disruptions and higher prices as a result. And so developing countries are going to find the energy they can find and afford. And that's going to mainly be coal and eventually nuclear, probably.
But there's this disconnect between what you're saying there, what the Europeans are saying with respect to this buyers cartel thing, and what they're saying about COP28 coming up. Because on the weekend or a Friday or something, they said that they were going to advocate for phasing out fossil fuels. So phasing out when? By 2050, by 2030. So they're going to push for phasing out fossil fuels at the same time that they're pushing for long-term contracts, like Germany is going to build all these new gas plants and coal plants, and somehow they're going to phase it out. Like, it makes no sense. They're not really talking to each other in this respect, but they're still going to push. They're still going to go on that. So, yeah.
Right.
Well, but the COP conference, remember, it was just year before last, they wouldn't even allow representatives of fossil fuel companies to attend the conference, much less have a rational discussion about it, right? So, I mean, at those COP conferences, if you start talking about the need to invest more in oil and gas and coal, you're going to be shunned. I mean, it's like cancel culture, on a global scale at these COP conferences. So you have to feed the narrative, and the narrative is, well, gosh, we're going off fossil fuels, and Joe Biden says we can do it in a decade, but his energy secretary says 35 years, and who knows what the reality is.
Confusion, a mess.
But you have to cling to the narrative, or you're canceled. And
even if it's big hypocrisy, really, because you don't invite them, you don't let them into COP, but you're also happy to buy their product in increasing volumes.
Right,
yeah. Luca is commenting about the economies growing,
and that created a lot of angst by the
Only the government's a growing economy, still full of poor people, seem to understand how critical it is to have access to cheap, plentiful, and reliable fossil fuels. How do you all explain this? That's what I was just talking about.
They don't want riots on their hands. They're well aware that a lot of poor people, if they get even poorer, they begin to get really unhappy and take to the streets.
Sri Lanka just provided, Sri Lanka,
Well,
exactly.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
But
While
if if the war ends, war, I don't know if it's exactly a war, it's the invasion. What happens? What can
it
happen?
is a war. Well,
It's a war.
nothing really, nothing immediately. I mean, Nord Stream is down. Russia is not fixing it. Why should it? Especially since the EU is so adamant that they do not want any more Russian energy, unless apparently it's in the form of liquefied natural gas. Because imports of Russian LNG last year into Europe reached a record, but this is not being talked about. So nothing will change quickly in any way. Russia, understandably, doesn't want to do business with the European Union either. So Europe will definitely need to rely on LNG and other pipeline supplies for the observable future, which means more expensive energy because they can't get cheaper gas, especially on the LNG market. LNG cannot be cheaper than pipeline gas.
Sure, never.
So energy costs, the era of cheap energy, as France's president said a few months ago, is over. The era of abundance is over, because if you don't have cheap energy, you don't have cheap anything.
Right.
So that's the reality ahead of us.
I don't know if I believe that. I think he's trying to prepare people for the idea that things are going to be more expensive, because he wants it to be more expensive.
Oh,
because
how about intent?
But like next year, the natural gas from Canada should be coming online. It'll be the first LNG terminal in operation, the Coastal Gas Link, which will put a significant amount into the Asian market. So if it goes into Asia, then that offsets other natural gas that perhaps Europe and other regions can buy. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next. That the Canadian government doesn't really want any more LNG. So after that first one, I don't know, but I do know there's the wood fiber one that's supposed to be operational in a couple of years as well. So that'll be two big ones on the west coast of Canada going to the Asian market. So that could change things a little bit.
It will still never be as cheap as pipeline gas. It just can't be.
Never.
Sure.
Never. The
Sad
costs
for Europe, but we did it to ourselves.
Right. I mean, if it was as cheap as pipeline gas, there'd be no reason to engage in the export of it, right? I mean, you couldn't make money doing it. Which, of course, most of these governments don't understand the concept of that. But right. And so, I mean, Europe has kind of been self-sanctioning itself. Nord Stream, you're right. Russia's not going to repair Nord Stream. I mean, why would they repair it? The U.S. might just blow it up again, right? I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. And or Ukraine, I guess we're supposed to believe Ukraine blew up Nord Stream.
With a yacht.
That's the latest narrative, right?
I'm
sure they did, right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm getting off subject. Never mind.
That's a good.
That's the level of the climate narratives as well. We're being told blatantly untrue things. And we are expected to believe them.
Yeah. And the more outrageous the lie, the better, apparently. I mean, it just is bizarre, the stuff some of these folks say. It's just really extraordinary.
But Temi, we have a chance with new renewables to reduce the energy demand or not?
I think that's another wishful thinking exercise. If only we built more wind, if only we had more solar, if we could just cover all of our roofs in solar panels, all would be well. But they still haven't solved someone said the law of electricity. They still haven't solved the issue of how do you back it up? How do you store it? Even if you have the batteries, what's the discharge rate? How often will they have to be replaced? How soon do they wear out? Can they be recycled? There's all of these other issues involved. And as we've said before, with respect to this, there's the windmills and the solar panels and stuff. So I don't see how any of that can help replace the absolute current efficiency of hydrocarbons. It's not there, and I don't see how Germany and Holland, they're pretty maxed out to some extent with the windmills on land. So what is that going to mean offshore? And if there's effects on since we're supposed to be so concerned about the oceans after that UN Ocean Treaty, what about the effect on whales and dolphins and various other sea creatures? So I
Well,
don't
it
know.
doesn't matter if the windmills are killing the whales. That doesn't matter because you're doing it for a good cause.
Yeah, it only matters if it's an oil spill,
Yeah.
and it kills a lot of animals.
And
Arena informed me this morning that the LA Times editorial board has figured out exactly how to solve that backup problem. Tell us that story, Arena.
Well, it's not news, actually. The idea has been pitched numerous occasions in the past. It's about using EVs when they're not being driven but are fully charged to drain them into the grid. Because, you drive during the day and then you go home and you start discharging what's left of your charge into the grid because solar farms go down as the sun goes down. Yeah. And then they will have to be charged again. Who knows when?
When? Yeah, I mean,
isn't true. Is it true? Where did you find this?
It's an actual idea in the LA Times. I posted it on Twitter. You can go and check it there. It's marvelous.
It's actually it's in the UK Climate Change Committee, whatever they're called. I can't remember, but they put out a thing 2 years ago, their big study about net zero transition, and that was one of their key components. Yeah. That people with EVs will plug it in, they'll drain it to the grid, and then recharge it when no one else has demand or something like that. I mean, well, like when precisely? So you go to use your car in the morning, and it's dead.
And it's dead. Okay, then so that I guess that strategy works for one day, and then it's over, right?
Yeah,
because the batteries can't be charged anymore.
So then that one day, it's great.
It's impossible. Something wrong. But see, Tammy mentioned COP28 and the UN, International Energy Agency, US government. All of them are talking about fossil fuels for a long time yet. So what does it mean exactly?
I mean, even Jennifer Granholm admitted last week that we're going to be using oil and gas in the 2050s and beyond. IEA is now projecting global demand growth for oil through 2040, and then just a very slight decline through 2050.
Totally opposite. The opposite of some
I mean,
months
it's
ago.
completely contradictory to this narrative that we're going to do away with all this stuff very quickly. And it's because the narrative has no basis in reality. There's not a credible
Scientific
projection from anyone that says we're going to be off of fossil fuels before the 2050s and really long past that. And so, I mean, at least, we have to commend the IEA for once for actually living in the real world where that projection is concerned.
Well,
it's very good to see. Yeah.
Well, then with respect to that, I mean, I get the idea that the state oil companies don't get the same bad press that the private companies do, because the Saudi Aramco data, it's the most money they've ever made in the history of the company or something like that. And the tone of the article was, wow, this is great. They're reinvesting. Good on you, Saudi Aramco. But when BP or Shell or Exxon comes out with their profits, suddenly it's at the end of the world and evil capitalism. So I can't help but shake this feeling that there's going to be this push towards nationalization. Companies can't be trusted to
Say
take
that
care
again.
of this
Say that
patrimony.
again, Tammy. You're your
Cut.
service
Cutting out,
cut out.
sorry.
But there's going to be a push
I'm
for
right
what?
beside the router. I'm right beside the router. That this push towards nationalizing the companies,
Oh,
because the
would
private
be great.
companies can't be trusted to invest properly, to manage it properly. And, what gets measured gets managed. So if they can just measure more and take over it, then they can provide more equitable pricing for people
Yeah,
and
that's right.
eventually phase it out to what's necessary from the state point of view. Because as I said, the Saudi Aramco numbers did not receive the same critical
no.
Yep.
that the private ones did.
Yeah, and so 2 points about the Saudi Aramco numbers. Their profit for 2022 of $161 billion was more than the combined profit of ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell,
It's
and BP
impressive.
combined.
A
Okay,
very big number.
that's the first point. And we talk about them reinvesting that profit. One of the things that they're reinvesting in, okay, that few are noting, is they're working with a couple of partners to create an entirely new automobile manufacturing company that's going to make not electric vehicles, not hydrogen vehicles, but internal combustion gas and diesel powered vehicles. Okay.
No way.
Yes. And they're investing many billions of dollars in this. Why are they doing that? Because they understand, because they live in the real world.
Yep.
They understand what the future is really going to be. So that's
Wow.
just the 2 points I wanted to make about that.
That's right.
No, thanks for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation today.
Thanks as always.
I only got us off the point 3 times today. So anyway.
And David, is almost 1 p.m. in the US. So
Double daylight savings time. Yes.
have a good day.
Have a great
Thank
week,
you.
everyone. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.